The World Tomorrow. The Worldwide Church of God presents Herbert W. Armstrong.
I'm not here to cram anything down your throat. It will happen, and when it happens, you will know that God or Allah sent a messenger here to tell you this, because I am his servant.
He said, God is going to do a new thing among the people of God, even in the Crusade Church of God in Russellville, something like he has never done before.
And I'm here to bring you the truth, because you don't hear this from any other voice. No one else is telling you the things that God is telling you through me. He's speaking through me.
If we're going to be that great and mighty people, such as the world has never seen, nor shall again, that's a new thing. What good is it if you're comfortable and God isn't?
And there has been many, many false churches. Jesus said, I will build my church. He didn't say, I will build my churches. But there is a true church that is undeceived.
And that we can be a people where the blood of Christ can flow from us into their open wounds to heal them and bring them into the wedding chamber.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Cult Next Door podcast. I am Mattie Lasiter, as always, joined by my sister, Ashley Teeter, and we are joined today by a special guest, Chelsie Ryan. She is our sister-in-law's sister. If anybody knows what the actual term is for that, put it in the chat, put it in the comments below. But we're very happy to have you here today. Thank you for coming up and joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Nervous, but excited at the same time.
Yeah, well, we're always a little bit nervous ourselves, but yeah, so yesterday was my first time meeting you.
Yes.
And I've heard about you mostly through Matt's account in episode 8. You were the mystery girl that he had a little summer crush on, and you know, that episode was particularly difficult for me to listen to, just hearing how that impacted Matt. And then, you know, I thought a lot about you, and I was, you know, really looking forward to someday talking to you about that. And then also talking to you about your overall experience in the Crusade Church, because I know you came in when you were just a little girl, and so you probably had a lot of similar experiences with our dad that we had. And so I'm really happy that you're here. There's a lot that I don't know, so most of what I'm going to hear today is for the first time with everybody else, and so I'm kind of anxious to jump in and discuss. Yeah, that's what I hear.
Yeah.
And hear, you know, what were the circumstances, you know, of your parents coming into Crusade? How did they find our dad, and how old were you? Just kind of want to get the origin story.
Yeah. So my upbringing was not very religious up until the point of 7 or 8 years old. My grandma kind of started getting into organized religion. Before that, I never really knew of her being very religious. If she was, it wasn't outwardly or outspoken about it. But she started kind of taking us to church occasionally, and she met a couple at her apartment complex that I know they were listening to Jack Van Impe, if you're familiar. He was an apocalypse-style preacher, you know, just the fire and brimstone. Basically fear-mongering a little bit, because, you know, you're going to go to hell and the world's going to end. Where's Jesus? Like, you're going to be lost. So that kind of woke her up a bit more, and she brought my mom and my stepdad into that, and that was kind of... my parents were worldly, and, you know, there was some, I don't know if they just needed more. And I think it kind of put the fear of God in them a little bit. So they started listening to those end time preachers. And they met a couple that they put the fear of God in my parents. And so they had certain beliefs, like ladies were not to wear shorts and pants. They were to have their hair long, head coverings when you pray, that sort of thing. And
Oh, I remember
they actually, his wife, my parents just let them come into our home, and they basically like helped do a clean sweep of everything. Like, I remember her going through our clothing drawers and like, this isn't godly, this is modest.
Oh my
this,
gosh.
That kind of thing. So they went through our house and helped us get rid of the sin.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
my parents, my stepdad was into rock and roll music and everything. So, we had a bonfire my mom had tarot cards, just different things like that. And they put everything out in the lawn, and we had a bonfire to get rid of everything. Like, that's how serious it was for them to like cast away that stuff and start a Christian life.
Wow. But at that time, there wasn't an organization necessarily connected to the lifestyle.
At that time, we were watching the TV evangelists and things like that. We would read our Bibles, but we didn't have like a home church yet. And that's when he talked to my parents, and he was like, there's this guy, he does services on Saturdays, and it's in his house. It's a very small group. I think you guys would really enjoy that kind of thing. And so
wow. So what do you know around what year that would have been?
That was in 99.
Oh.
I was 8 years old.
Still in the house.
Yeah, I was 8 years old when we came to the Lasiter house for the first time.
Okay.
And I turned 9 probably a few months after that, I think. But that was my first year for the feast and everything. We, up until that point, we celebrated all of the secular holidays. Our last Christmas was in 98. And then, we met that couple, and it was no more worldly or secular holidays rooted in paganism. I'm pretty sure we started doing the food laws before we got to the Lasiters. The guy that brought us to the Lasiter house, they believed in the food laws and the holy days, the biblical holy days. So that was kind of our introduction. And then he brought us to the Lasiter house because they believed all of those things. So we were already kind of in that mindset. It was just, we actually had a community, a very small one, to engage with. And that's where we started.
Oh. Do you remember coming at that age? Like, do you have very many memories of the early years, like, that you were there? I know that's not...
My memory is a little blurry from that time in general.
Yeah.
But I do remember, like, I don't remember vividly that first time meeting everyone, but I just remember, if I'm not mistaken, we actually were introduced to Larry before a Saturday service. Like, we had gone over to their house. I remember the first person I ever met, I walked into the house, and Jen was sitting in where Larry's chair was, and she was sitting in his chair, and she was doing her homework. And that was my first person that I met. And then I would say somebody would have opened the door, though. Like, that's just my memory. I don't know who opened the door, but Jen was like the first person that I really like fixated on. And she seemed really nice. And I don't remember if I met all of the siblings at that point. I think there were just a few people running around. It was just a quick visit, and then we came to church the next Sabbath, I think. But we were welcomed warmly. Nothing seemed off. We didn't have a lot of experience with churches. We'd only been to one with my grandma, really. So didn't really know what to expect, and definitely never had like house services. There's it was a small group, but probably 20 people in a living room, all crowded on couches and chairs, So it was very strange. And one of the biggest things I remember is my parents were very strict on like, you're going to sit here and you're going to pay attention. Like I've heard a lot of stories about how, you know, the kids got to sit in the floor and play quietly, have their coloring books, have their toys and everything. And that was not the case for me and my sister. I was 8, she was 6, and there was an immediate expectation of, you're going to sit here and you're going to pay attention. So we didn't. I remember feeling a lot of jealousy towards the other kids that got to sit around and like play and stuff, because that's what we wanted to do. Wow. 6 and 8 years old and expected to sit through hour-long services. Yeah. And I don't remember being taken out or anything, because I mean, we sat there and we paid attention because we knew that it wouldn't be good if we didn't.
Yeah, I don't remember what age it was that we had to start sitting in the chair in the row and be paying attention or have our Bible and notebook. Yeah. But it was very young. I mean, it was definitely, you're a toddler. Yes, you can be on the floor with your toys, but I do feel like it was pretty early that we were expected in worldwide, and I think some of that was Dad as well.
Yeah, he had high expectations for you guys, and like not all of the parents had those expectations. There were a few girls around mine and my sister's age, and you know, they were our age and they were getting to do all that stuff. So it's like, I want to just hang out and but I mean,
I'm assuming that your parents were influenced, you know, by Dad, and
they wanted to make a good impression as well.
Yeah, like seeing, you know, I know, Matt, you've talked about how Dad wanted you guys were the example for other people coming in, and so I'm sure that your parents felt that.
Yeah, I think so, because I mean, the thing is like, it wasn't like we were there for a few services and then, you know, they were like, all right, you're gonna have to straighten up. It was like an immediate expectation to, you're gonna sit here, you're gonna listen, you're gonna pay attention. I know you talked about like being quizzed after. I don't think that happened when we were really young, but I do know that like became a thing because they wanted to make sure that we were actually paying attention and engaging in the service, not just sitting there and being off in our own little world. So yeah, there was a lot of adult expectations on children.
Yeah. And at that time, was it set up, the services, were they set up more like similar to how Worldwide was, with like the 3 opening songs and then a sermonette and then announcements and then a sermon and then ending with a hymn? Because Dad obviously changed the whole thing up at one point, but I don't know how long he kept that structure that we had for all of those years.
I know songs were always part of the service. I don't remember if at first there were less songs and it kind of grew into more of like a mini concert before the sermon, but I mean, that's kind of what happened.
Did we go from so I'll paint the picture real quick for people. So in our house, in the living room, we would set up a little table with a lecternette. I think was even the brand.
I remember
like
that
a little
thing.
lecternette, and that was like set up basically in front of the TV, and then people just piled into the living room, into like the area around the living room, and metal chairs. Like you just got in there. And then we had, as you know, Ashley, like the room from the living room that connected to it, the big double doors, the music room, quote unquote. And we had a piano in there. And I think, did we go into the music room for like a song thing when you first started coming?
I don't remember. I know we did move into that, and I remember like having praise and prayer services in the music room where we'd all be in like circles and it'd be dark, and I do remember that.
I don't remember if we were doing like full on. It may have been more like the hymn style real early on.
Yeah.
And then it kind of shifted maybe.
I think so.
Do you remember Blessed and Happy is the Man?
I don't remember that one.
If you don't, then you probably
I don't think I remember that one.
A ton of like
I've tried to block out a lot though.
Those hymns to me were just the worst. This page number 1.
Nothing but the blood of Jesus was one that.
Okay.
The imagery of that one, just, oh, no.
A lot of I seem to remember a lot of the worldwide hymns, they were direct from scripture. So it wasn't, I mean,
They
I don't
weren't.
even know how to say it. It's like trying to think of some of the lyrics, like
By the waters of Babylon. It's not a fun
no.
hymn, but it's, it's based on actual
They are
scripture.
chaff before the wind, driven to and fro. I remember that line.
Well, when you put it like that sounds pretty good.
No, but it's just I feel like we were singing some pretty dark shit sometimes, and we're all just belting it out. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember having long music services. When I first started, if I remember correctly, it was more just we'd have a sermonette, and then we'd have a sermon, and then we'd have lunch, and then we'd do testimony.
Yeah, and or Bible study.
And
type
or Bible
thing
study.
At that point.
Yeah, it was there wasn't an exact formula at that point.
Yeah.
I think it was just kind of whatever Larry felt like doing that day, which has kind of always been the thing. But
yeah. So I don't know what happened. How old were you when this happened with Matt?
You're 2 years younger than me.
13.
Are you a year and a half different than me? Right. What year?
Almost 2 years under. It's right under 2
Were
years.
you 1990?
Yeah.
Okay. And it was September.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're
we're
just
almost
shy of
exactly
2
2 years apart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would want to cover between coming in at 8 and that? Because I know that's probably kind of blurry for you, or anything leading up to that happening with him.
Well, there are some things that I've listened to the entire podcast, and in preparation for this, when you guys had your break for season 2, I was jonesing for more episodes, but I decided to go ahead and go back through the first season, which hard again. It's hard to listen to, but one of the stories that you had talked about, that just talking about how fearful you were as a young kid, and just the guilt and shame that you felt at such a young age. I did have a story kind of like yours with the unleavened bread and the donut.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to hear it.
So I think it was my first or second Day of Atonement, which is a day where we fast for 24 hours, no food, no water. So I was either 9 years old or 10 years old at this time. For, just to give everybody the perspective, 9 or 10 years old.
Oh, we were all expected to be doing this at the youngest ages.
Yeah.
I think even, were you doing it at 5 or 6 years old, Matt?
I don't remember not doing it.
Right. Yeah.
I know Jess, the first Day of Atonement, we were both expected to keep it. So that would have been, Jess was 8 years. No, she would have been 7.
Just 7.
And I would have been 9.
That's insane.
I don't remember if I was 9 or 10. It was one of those two.
And this is no water.
No
That's
food, no water, 24 full hours of fasting.
I remember, I don't know how old you were, Matt, but I remember being worried about you the first time you were doing atonement, because I just thought, God, he's just a little boy.
I'm not trying to, talk about my sister's medical things, but Jess at that age, she was having blood sugar issues. She was hypoglycemic.
Yeah.
And so her blood sugar would just dip. And so for her to fast at that age, knowing that she has blood sugar issues, that was a worry for me. And I was a kid. Is she going to be okay with this? Obviously, we survived all of it, but it's still...
It's so irresponsible by the leaders, honestly. Yeah. I don't ever remember maybe there were caveats, and someone can comment to that. I don't remember there being caveats. Even when I was a breastfeeding mom of a, very young baby, I was expected to fast. And you're supposed to have more water.
You need more hydration. Yeah.
And that can impact your milk supply with your baby. It's just wild to me.
Yeah. It's not safe.
No.
But I know that wasn't Larry's doing on that behalf. I mean, I know that's, the scriptures, that's what we were celebrating and observing, but Larry didn't make my parents make us fast. He didn't make any there were young children our age that weren't made to fast or they could have water. It was just dependent on the parents. I'm sure if it had continued and we weren't being made to do that, there probably would have been something said. But my parents were they wanted to do everything the right way.
Well, the way that it was being modeled.
Yeah. And so they wanted to do it right. They didn't want to, excuse my language, half-ass it. But so, yeah, one of my first or second atonement, I just remember we had gotten to the Lasiter house and I knew that there was a piece of candy in the glove box of the van that we were in, and everyone was getting out of the vehicle to go into the house, and I knew that it was there. So I was purposefully trying to be slow, take my time. Everyone's getting out of the van. I was like, oh, I've got to get this thing, I got to get my Bible and stuff together, And I just remember waiting and watching them all go inside. And then I snuck into the glove box and got that piece of candy. And I'll never forget, it was banana Laffy Taffy. I hated banana flavored, any kind of candy. I loved bananas, hated banana flavored runts, that kind of thing. That was the most delicious piece of Laffy Taffy I had ever eaten.
I will say that is like the only good thing about atonement would be
the food tastes better when you break that fast.
Or I remember like a soda drinking like a Coke right after.
Yes.
Man, nothing ever tasted better.
Growing up, we were serious about that fast breaking. Like, I remember us kids talking like, what are you going to eat first?
Oh, yeah.
What are you going to drink first? And it's like after your first few, you're like, man, you can't start off with soda. You got to start off slow with water. And then you got to work your way into some hot cocoa, that kind of thing.
I always wanted to eat one dill pickle chip first.
Oh,
Ease
really?
my way in and be like, this is amazing.
That's a big deal.
Wow. I remember going to restaurants sometimes and you're just like waiting there until like we're all doing the countdown on our watches.
Do you remember Ryan's?
Yeah. Yeah.
So were we doing that? Yeah. I remember like we would all go to Ryan's, the buffet.
Yeah.
And wait.
So you're having to wait until like the minute. So you're just smelling all this delicious food. And you're
sometimes I remember one time, maybe it was at an Italian place, but they're like bringing out the breadsticks and all the stuff, and we're all just like looking at it, waiting.
But yeah, I snuck that piece of candy, and I just remember instant remorse because I'm like, I know I shouldn't have done that. And your dad did like to preach about like the holy days, and he made a huge emphasis on how serious they were and how like life or death it was. And the Lord knows if you consume anything during the atonement, he's watching. So I just remember like years going by and still having fear like that he knows. And that's like one of the bad things that I've done throughout my life. And it's just like, it was a piece of candy. I was hungry. Like at this point, it's 10 in the morning, 9 or 10 in the morning. I've already been fasting for like 12 hours.
Yeah.
So I just remembered when you told that story, I was just like, oh man, I remember that. And that was one of the things that kind of came to my mind. But
did you carry that for a long time?
A long time. Like a long time. Honestly, Passover was another one that he was very serious and very solemn about. And one of the things he always talked about was not taking the sacrifice in vain and not, trampling the sacrifice, respecting it, and how there are consequences if you take that sacrifice with an unwilling heart, or I don't remember all of his wording.
If you're not right with the Lord.
But if you're not right with the Lord, then there could be consequences. And
die.
I'm thinking like actual real life physical consequences that could happen from that. There were times where I took Passover in absolute fear, shaking, just like, what if I did something and my heart's not actually right and I take this and like fire and brimstone, I could drop dead. I haven't seen it happen, but who knows? He makes it seem that serious, and that's like at a very young age.
That resonates with me so much, and I hadn't thought about that in years, but the emphasis on being like of a pure heart when you take Passover,
Yes.
and the solemnness of it, and
the washing of your feet.
yes, which I had issues with that because I hated it, but it's like then I had all this guilt because I didn't want to do that. And it wasn't even that I didn't want to wash someone else's feet. That was more comfortable to me than having my own feet washed. But it was just the whole thing. And then also never feeling good enough, never ever feeling like I'm actually cutting it. And so then I'm not ever going into Passover thinking that I'm in a good space to be accepting the sacrifice again. So I totally feel that. Because I don't think I ever had a Passover where I felt like I was worthy to take it.
Exactly that. Like, as you were talking, I was like, I don't think there was ever a time where I actually felt like I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, there was never a sense of, okay, I'm okay with God. I'm okay with, like, I just felt like I maybe I didn't repent hard enough for this thing, or,
And in hindsight, you look back and you're like, okay, like I wasn't doing anything outrageous. This is just like normal human stuff. But in your head, when you're in a high control group like this, everything is just so magnified. And so you have a quote unquote bad attitude one day.
Yeah.
Well, that's enough to make you feel like maybe I'm not worthy to
not
be,
even,
I got mad in traffic the other day. Like,
yeah. Well, there was also a lot of emphasis on your thoughts. And it's like, I didn't even have to necessarily do anything bad to feel like I wasn't right. I could have had a thought.
So right.
And felt like, okay, I'm just, if I die, I die kind of thing. Like, it really was. There was a lot of fear involved in the Passover and things like that because.
And that's a good point when you said you felt like there may be actual physical consequences, like punishment.
Yeah.
I felt that too. That's so funny that I haven't even thought about that, but I did think maybe I'm going to be killed in a car wreck, or I'm going to contract a disease, or just so crazy how it messes with your head.
No, I mean, hearing you share your story, I was talking to my sister about this last night. It's like, there are just so many similarities, and listening to you tell your story helped me in a lot of ways to know that, like, some of the thoughts that I had, some of the feelings that I have had and still feel aren't just me and my experience. Like, it sucks that we both have those thoughts and feelings, but it's nice to know that I'm not alone in that. But you talking about your fear of like demon problems and the apocalypse and having nightmares and things like that. I still deal with apocalypse style dreams. I mean, I've talked to my therapist about it, and it's like, I'm still dealing with those thoughts and fears, even as an adult that's been out of it for, it'll be 16 years.
Yeah.
In the fall. And
just so impressionable when you're young. I think when those things are drilled into your head when you're a child, we've talked about it before, but you're just making all these connections in your brain and these neural pathways. And it's just almost like it's set then. And it's like a recording in your brain that keeps coming up, even though you might not actually intellectually believe that anymore. And it just feels like such an uphill battle sometimes to like override and like reroute, So yeah, I appreciate you coming on and sharing this, because I really believe that talking about it is a really powerful way of normalizing it and kind of putting it in the light, and then other people who are experiencing this can get benefit from your story. Because I think a lot of it is just realizing, oh, like I'm not abnormal. Other people are struggling with this as well.
Yeah.
Like 16 years later, it's just because you're out doesn't mean it's over.
No. And honestly, I mean, I got out when I was 18.
Yeah.
So I was on my own and completely disowned from all of my family, the entire community that I grew up with for 10 years, basically, because from 8 to 18, it's 10 years of my life. 10 very important developmental years of my
formidable.
life.
Yeah.
It's been 16 years, but after I got out, you know, I did self-medicate a lot with alcohol. I'm not going to lie. That was something that helped me numb the pain and just not think about it. I feel like when I got out and for many years after that, I just pushed everything down. I didn't want to think about it. I tried to block it out of my mind. There was a lot of disassociating during the time and after, just trying to because it hurt too much. I lost everyone except for my grandma. She still was there and she helped me through some things. But I'd lost my mom, my dad, my sister, the entire friend group that I had, because where we were from, basically that's all you had. I had moved to an apartment when I was 18 or 17, and that kind of helped me leave. I didn't plan on leaving. Certain circumstances around that year, I couldn't do it anymore. But I did spend probably the last 15 years covering things up with alcohol.
Yeah.
And it's been 14 months as of 2 days ago that I've been sober.
Oh, congratulations.
And really started trying to do the work, because I've just been so fearful of what if I'm not normal?
Right.
I've never been normal, but that's okay.
What is normal?
But the fear of wanting to fit in and everything, and just mental health was a big thing growing up in my family. Several of my relatives deal with mental illness, and that's not a bad thing. It's just wanting to not experience those things and trying to be kind of in denial about it. But I lost we weren't super close, but I lost a friend that I really loved and cared about, and she passed away from alcohol use. And I had already kind of started working my way to being sober, and that was it for me. She was a year younger than I was, and she died from alcohol abuse.
Wow.
And so that was an eye-opening thing for me. Plus, I had nephews that I wanted to take care of myself for, but it was until I was able to get sober that I really started wanting to work on that. And then the podcast came out, and I started listening to some of the episodes, and I was just like, okay, you need therapy. So I've been doing that for almost a year, and it really has helped. My therapist has gone through the podcast with me and just helped me work through some of the things that I've avoided for so long. So it's not easy talking about these things by any means. It's very vulnerable. I feel very uncomfortable, but I do know that it's important, because I know how much hearing both of your stories has helped me. And I feel like if it'll help one person, then it's worth it. Even if it just helps me, but I want it to help more people.
Yeah.
Because it's important.
Yeah. And I think you sharing, being so vulnerable about your coping mechanisms, that's important too. I think Gabor Mate talks about alcoholism, addiction, all of that he actually will, when he's counseling somebody, he's like, good job. You found a way to preserve yourself instead of just exiting the
Might
world.
Have pickled myself in the process a little
right.
bit.
But now let's find a healthier way to cope. But I like that resonated with me because that there's no shame in that.
Yeah.
It's like you had to find a way to cope with all of the trauma, and you did find a way for a while that allowed you to continue to
Yeah.
be here with us, and then now you're ready to do
Yeah.
some harder stuff. And I think that's admirable, and I think a
you.
lot of people can probably relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not easy to talk about. It's not like I was drinking bottles and bottles every day or
Yeah.
anything, but there were rare instances where I didn't have a drink in a
Yeah.
day. Like,
Yeah.
I would drink 2 or 3 a night.
Yeah.
It was a pretty consistent thing. So I just knew that wasn't sustainable.
Yeah.
And I knew that, when I realized that I kind of used that as a crutch, but it was like, what else do I have? At that time I was just like, it's this or drugs.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And growing up in the family environment that I did, like, certain family members were doing drugs, and I knew the impact of that on everyone. And it's like, with alcohol, you can disguise it as, I'm having fun with you guys, I'm having a drink or two,
Right. Yeah.
we're gonna go to this beer festival, and it's not like I always just got like sloppy drunk. It's just, it was still a crutch that I used.
Yeah.
And drugs were out of the question for me because I knew how big that impacted my family and myself included. And so I was just like, I can't do that.
You can't go through what we've all been through without some type of way of coping. And
Yeah.
I think we choose different things.
Yeah.
And I know it's not exactly the same, but I think that's a large reason why I ran a lot.
Yeah.
I did get addicted to that and felt like I had to have that.
Yeah.
And it got excessive for me. It was too much. It was a good thing, but then it was too much of a good thing.
Yeah.
And I realized why I was doing it. And I think that's similar to what you're saying. It's like, there's like not like a big deal to go to a beer festival and have a couple
Yeah.
of beers. But if you realize I'm doing this because I'm trying to cope with something that I
Yeah.
don't want to deal with, and that's, something else. And yeah, I relate to that. What about you, Matt? How are you coping?
I was just trying to think of what they are, what my
Yeah.
coping mechanisms are.
Yeah, I'm
Creative
still learning
outlets,
how to
music?
Maybe.
know.
Playing music, I feel like, has always been a big one for you, though.
Yeah. Escapism through that, probably.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm sure I've got some things.
Oh,
Well,
you got some things. No, I'm just kidding.
It was like the fun part is when you realize that that's an unhealthy coping mechanism, and then you have to, stop that. And it's like, my therapist is like, well, what are you doing to cope now?
Yeah,
I'm like, I'm just out here experiencing life for the first time, real life, real life, and it sucks. But I mean, I love to cook and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just used a lot of like numbing through media and movies and TV shows and things like that. But it's better than drinking. So I'm working my way up to healthier coping mechanisms. It's been a lot in the last few years.
Yeah.
So it's still a process. It's like, I kind of feel bad that I just pushed things aside for so long and just ignored them. I know.
I know, but it's also like, how
would I have dealt with it otherwise?
Yeah, literally, I always look at it like, you didn't have the tools.
I really didn't.
So what were you supposed to do without the right tools, or even knowing what the tools are?
Yeah. For sure. Having names for things helps, like knowing, because when I left, there were plenty of people I would talk about my experiences, and they're like, you were from a cult. You were in a cult. And I'm like, no, it was just a non-denominational church. They kind of picked and chose what they wanted, but it wasn't a cult. And then...
And if we left, we
Yeah.
went straight to hell. Like, we had to be in it.
When did that change for you?
When did what change?
The recognition of what Crusade was in particular. Like, how long did it take?
Good question.
Oh, like I said, I really did just kind of push things down and put them to the side and just not think about them as much as I could. So I just that was my life before 18, and this was my life after 18. I just kind of tried to survive. And it wasn't until like the podcast came out, honestly, that I ever really accepted that, oh, this was a cult.
Really?
Like,
Wow.
I didn't do any research on cults. I didn't do any of the work. But I think that's what I'm saying with the podcast and then starting therapy around the same time. That's when I've really started to do the work and process a lot of the things that have happened. I know y'all have talked a lot about your stories, but it's also brought up stories of my own. And so that's helped me navigate the healing process. I don't think I ever wanted to accept that I was from a cult, you know? I didn't want to be the weird cult kid because I knew I've met a few people who had been in like certain cult situations, and I was just like, I wasn't part of that. Well, and that, and a lot of the perception is like, you know, you're in a cult, so there was a lot of freaky sex stuff going on, and like, no, quite the opposite with ours. It was very stigmatized, but like, so you just don't want that. There's a stigma revolving around that, and you just don't want to be associated with that kind of thing. So it wasn't until, you know, this came out and I was like, oh, yeah, I was in a cult. Awesome. Not awesome, but.
Yeah.
And it got to be a little like buzzwordy.
Yeah, it was trendy.
Yeah, just like narcissism did, where it's like, well, everybody's a narcissist. Like, okay, like, no, but we get what you're saying, but that kind of thing. So that was a struggle for me early on, where it's like, I can recognize all these things about what we were in and be like, yeah, but it wasn't that.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to just be a slap a label that everybody's slapping on everything.
There's a lot of negative connotations with that word. And I mean, for a good reason. Yeah. There's a lot of messed up stuff that happens in those environments.
But there is a power, though, in like recognizing and naming some of these things, just even for yourself. I know, like for me, it's been that way, where it's like, I can just recognize this, call it for what it is. Like, I'm not trying to convince someone else of that. Like, I can just acknowledge, like, this is what I experienced, and this is, you know, this is the label that actually describes this thing for me, and that's been helpful. So
yeah, for sure as well. Okay, so you came in when you were 8 to the Crusade Church, and then I think you mentioned earlier you were around the age of 13 when you and Mattie struck up something between you. And anyone who's listened to this podcast has heard about the catastrophic events that occurred as a result of that. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that, what that was like for you, maybe starting from the beginning.
We grew up together a little bit. I mean, I knew him from the time I was 8, so we knew each other for several years. We were in the same age group. Before we came to this church, we had all kinds of like friends that were boys. Our parents didn't care if who we spent time with, as long as, you know, they felt like we were safe. And so we would spend time at our grandma's, and she'd have kids around. And so we were used to having male friends. That was never something that was like weird or, you know, bad. So, you know, we struck up a really good friendship. And as you do when you start to hit your teen years, we took a liking to each other, and things progressed from there. We were writing notes and sneaking notes back and forth. We were sneaking around when we knew nobody was looking, and spending time together. So my stepdad found a note that I had dropped, and it was in July of 2004. You know, Jenny spoke on that. He said, like, what has the Lord placed at my feet? Which I didn't know he thought that, or, you know, I had never heard that before.
That felt so dramatic.
Yeah. I just remember there were times where, you know, we always went to the Lasiter's house after church. And for some reason, I wanted to stay home, if I remember correctly. And I had they had dropped me off and they had gone to the Lasiters. But in the process of getting out of the van or something, I had dropped the note and I knew that I had lost it, but I had no idea where I had lost the note. So I'm like freaking out, but trying not to let it show, because I'm like, I could have lost it somewhere where no one from the church or my family will ever find it, Teen hoping that she's not gonna, get in trouble. But I remember them coming home and like feeling a weird vibe. I don't know. Things didn't seem normal. And I don't remember if it was that night or the next day, but I remember my parents having my younger sister go upstairs because they needed to talk to me. And I was just, my stomach, dropped. There's a weight there now. Because I'm like, they know something. Yeah. And in the note, that note specifically was talking about how I was looking forward to the feast, because the feast prior, there was a time where he had like thrown a rock at my window, and I snuck out of the cabin that my sister and I were staying in and snuck under the cabin, and we sat together. And so like the feast was a time where we knew that we could kind of sneak out and actually get to spend time together. So I was like saying how I was looking forward to the feast, and that was, planning ahead. So that was also not a good look. We were planning our deceptions, I mean, it is what it is. We were trying to spend as much time with each other as we could at that time.
Yeah.
So,
and you were doing this on the down low because it was absolutely
we knew that it was not okay. I mean, we knew that, but we were like, I mean, they're never going to know, you think you're being sneaky enough. No one's going to find out. And we had kept that going from summer of 2003 to summer of 2004 without people finding out about it. So it had been a pretty good amount of time. We thought we were slick.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I don't. Did you say it was that long? Because for some reason, so. I was thinking this was a very abbreviated time, and that's not.
No. So does that sound right to you?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Because with the timeline, we had spent time together that feast, and then we were looking forward to the next one. Okay. I do remember that. So it was about a year.
All right. Well, then I stand corrected. It was not a summer. It was not a summer romance.
I remember you were talking about like we thought we were slick. I remember specifically, like I don't know why we were where we were, but I remember we were in Sarah's car and like you were in the passenger seat. And you had like put your hand back so that we could hold hands.
We were going to maybe the Right to Life march. Maybe. It was a long drive, and like if we would try to like ride together in the same vehicle. Yeah. And he would place himself, or I would place myself behind him, so we could like secretly hold hands and like different sneaky stuff like that.
That's so innocent though, and sweet. Honestly, I hate that it was made into something so dirty and bad and evil like it was. Yeah. That's really a shame.
It was tame. Like there were kisses, but there was nothing else past that. Yeah. But I mean, we would try to sit wherever we could to sit next to each other and things like that. And there was an older gentleman at our church that owned a machine shop, and during the summer, we would go and help him do things, and if he would go off, we would take an opportunity to spend a little time together, and there were 2 times that we almost got into some serious trouble, like we could have been found out, but somehow we managed to escape suspicion.
What about at church? Did you kind of avoid
there were a
each
few
other?
Times we tried to play it off, I think. Yeah. Like we were friendly, but we knew not to talk to each other for too long, not to like laugh at each other's jokes too heavily. Like we knew what was appropriate and what wasn't. So we kind of tried to like make it appear like we weren't like into each other, you know? We tried to make it.
Yeah, because like you'd mentioned before, like we became good friends before that.
We
So I
were.
think we were just trying to like, okay, let's just
How did
be
we
like
act before
we
this?
were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
So that's
because if you
basically
just
what we
stop
did.
interacting, then it's weird.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think we had the wherewithal to be like, let's just try to be as normal as we were beforehand, you know?
I know there were a few times we did exchange a few embraces or kisses at the church. Like I would stay late if there was a lady in the church that would practice vocals and stuff after services, and with him running the sound and everything, I would just stay and be like, I'm gonna help watch her kid, you know? And my sister sometimes would stay, some of the kids would stay, and then we'd all ride back over to the Lasiters after that. So like we would find times in that to
Ooh, in the church building.
Yes, and that was mentioned in the letter.
Oh, yeah.
In God's most holy place.
But I say those things because those specific things were brought up in the letter that I was given when everything happened.
It was like we had defiled the temple.
We
Specifically
used
was
the
like-
Lord's house as the devil's
Yes.
playground, I think is
that
what
what-
he
the
said. Something
terminology?
like that.
Okay. Podcast title, Devil's Playground.
Yeah.
Got it.
But if I'm not mistaken, that was pretty much the exact wording, because I was like, how would I think that on my own? Like that just sits so firmly in my brain. Yeah, you used God's house as a playground for wickedness.
That sounds like
That was it.
that sounds
That's
right.
the part that like
Do you
really.
have the letter?
No,
Oh,
I wish I did. You know, I kept that thing. And I don't know how many times I went back and read it. And I know that that was not a good thing to do. But even after I left, like I moved into the apartment that I live in now. And I've lived in that apartment for 10 years. And I had it when I moved into this apartment. And then we had a housewarming party or some people over, and me being in a cult got brought up. And of course I'm like, no, it wasn't a cult. But I was like, but this did happen. And then they're like, what? And I was like, yeah, I still have the letter that was given to me. And I brought it out and read it and had certain people read it. And they were just like, how could he say these things to a 13, 14-year-old person? Even a grown person, how do you say those things? And we'll get into. But yeah, so they found the letter, and I remember them sending my sister upstairs to have a serious conversation, and we sat at the kitchen table. And as soon as I sit down in my brain, I'm just like, I don't know if it's something we had talked about, but deny. Do not say yes
like
to
your
anything.
Survivor skills.
Yeah,
Survival,
no, it was just like deny, because unless they have proof, they don't know anything. And so it was, they were asking me like, is there anything going on between you and Matthew? And I was just like, I don't know what you're talking about, kind of thing. Yeah, Matt, who? I'm not proud of it. I mean, I'm not proud of my part in some of this. Even, I mean, it was deceitful, and there were a lot of things going on. But they basically were just like, we found the letter, so we know. There's no saying that anything didn't happen. And they're like, and the Lasiters know. And that just, another gut punch, like, oh no. Because I did know at that point, you know, how strict Larry and Treon were, and mostly Larry. But I did know how hard he could come down, because we weren't his kids. But if we were acting out, he had no problem snapping his finger and telling us to get in line, you know?
Yes.
Like, start acting right kind of thing. So, like, we weren't his kids, but he did treat us like his kids sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But we knew that you guys, we didn't get anything compared to what you guys got. But I was like, oh no, Matt, like, what's going on? And so basically, they told me that they had found the letter and told the Lasiters about it. And then they were like, so what all did you do? And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, no, they're asking Matthew the same questions, and we're going to know if you're not telling the truth, because what he's, we're going to know if your stories don't match up, so you might as well just tell us what actually happened. And so I was like, we hugged, we kissed. There was nothing, like, other than that, no sexual component to it.
Were you required to, like, write down everywhere, that type of thing?
I never had to write anything down.
Okay.
But I do remember them asking, like, what all did you guys do, and where did all of this happen? Okay. So I do remember, like, having to tell them, we kissed under the cabin at Feast of Tabernacles. We snuck off at so-and-so's machine shop twice. There was a time, I honestly can't believe you did it, but I lived how far away when we lived by the park?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
we lived half a mile, maybe?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Well, we made plans for him to come see me. So, like, in the middle of the night, he knocked on my window.
You snuck out?
Oh, yeah.
He snuck out.
You little rebel.
Rode his bike.
I love it.
To see me. And so he knocked on my window, scared the shit out of me. I still remember that because I had, like, an air conditioner in my bedroom window, and it had, like, the little accordion thing to, like, go up against the window. And I remember hearing a knock and then hearing that thing pull to the side, and it's like, Chelsie. Like, that's what I woke up to. It scared the shit out of me. But anyway, so that had happened. And I snuck out, and there was a little shed over by the house. And so I snuck out, and we sat on the side of the shed and sat next to each other for I don't know how long before I started hearing my parents yelling for me.
Oh, my goodness.
They had found out that I had snuck out in the middle of the night. And this I do feel really bad for, because my parents actually did have, like, fear of my safety.
Like abduction or something?
Yeah, because I had snuck out and they were trying to find me, and, like, we're already here. What do we do? But what if they come and find you? So, like, I had him go home, and then I sat there for a long time. Like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Like, if I come out, they're going to see me and they're going to be like, why are you outside? So I'm like, oh God. So, like, I had snuck around that shed over to the house that was next to our house and, like, walked around that way. And, they found me. But when they found me, there was a convenience store, like, right around the corner, and they had even gone as far as, like, my brother-in-law and sister were living with us at the time, and so they had sent them to the gas station to see if they had seen me, and they're like, yeah, there was this young girl with some guy earlier, and they were buying condoms. And I was like,
geez.
What?
So they thought that I was that girl for a minute.
Gosh.
And then, like, they found me, and I wasn't with anybody. And they're like, what happened? And I had a history of sleepwalking when I was younger.
Oh.
So I just played it off like I had sleptwalked. But they had told me, like, we thought you were with some guy because they thought they saw somebody with your description. Like, they were so worried. And I felt terrible about that because I was like, that's not what I wanted to happen, because they thought I was just off doing some random stuff with somebody.
Whoa.
Which, I don't know.
But if they had seen Mattie with you, they would have actually probably not believed that wasn't you at the convenience store. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, man, and I so vividly remember, like, waiting until Dad had gone to bed, because, he stayed up late.
I was about to ask you that.
Waiting until Dad had gone to bed, and wait just, like, a short window to make sure,
was
like,
that
it's
like
all
2
settled.
in the morning or something?
It was like
later.
3, 4,
3.
I don't know. Because
Getting the bike out of the shed, putting my little headphones on with the Walkman, listening to, was it 100.3 The Edge?
The Edge.
And listen, I'd be riding my bike listening to Seether and Disturbed, and,
Oh, that's
and ride
so funny.
the half mile over And then I would park the bike on the banks of like the creek and then cross the creek because I didn't want my bike to be
Did that happen more
on.
than once? And it was just the one time that we got caught?
I think maybe
Or
twice.
Maybe. It didn't happen very often. I think it was once or twice.
But I would sneak out just to like ride my bike around in the middle of the night and listen to music though.
Like a weirdo.
You did that already?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it was already, but like whether I was going to her house or not, like I would do that sometimes, like, because I guess I thought like, this is cool. I'm a teen.
Well, honestly,
I can go out at
some
night.
freedom.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking symbolically, you're like completely suffocating in this structure and in this dynamic with dad and all of it. And that was like your only time to really probably ever feel free from it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe I had done that one time before,
I
but
think
when
so.
that happened, we were like, okay,
No more.
this is a little too scary.
Yeah, that was too close for comfort,
Yeah.
and I couldn't be like, oh, I sleptwalk again.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I got very lucky the first time, and like, you know, when everything found out, they're like, so you weren't sleepwalking, and I was like, no, and they were like, I can't believe we fell for that. I was just like, on you on that one, but I'm just bringing these things up because some of the stuff was in the letter. And then there was a time or two where Sarah and Jen had me stay the night. And Jess also stayed the night a few times. I don't know. But there were a few times where I snuck out of their room because they shared a room and they made a pallet at the end of the bed for us to sleep on. But I remember like waiting till everyone fell asleep and then like squeaking out into the hallway and going into the bathroom, and we met each other a few times in there. For us to do that with his sisters in that bedroom and then Larry and Treon in the bedroom next, like it was all upstairs. Like we
Pretty
were
bold.
flying
That was very
really close
bold.
to the sun.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they asked us everything, and I just told them because I was like, they're going to find out if I'm not telling the truth, so I might as well just tell all of the truth. But it was you're 13, you know, that's a hard thing to share to any parent, much less parents that you know are going to come down hard on you for that. From the podcast, you said that the 40 days and 40 nights thing was from one of your trips, but I remember being told pretty early on. Maybe it was like one of the first few days.
That it was going to be 40?
Yeah,
Oh,
because
wow.
I remember knowing pretty early on, I feel like. Or maybe they just had, because I know it was said in the previous podcast episode that like my parents did not do the same as your parents did, and probably not to the same harshness as Larry did, but they were taking on the example that was given to them, so they did take it seriously. I was in my room for 40 days and 40 nights. And I got the letter, I think it was the next day after everything happened, or the day after that. It was
From dad.
very soon after everything happened that I got the letter from. It was said that it was from Larry and Treon, but it was Larry speaking everything. And yeah, it started off with, you know, we've welcomed you into our home, you know, because they had let me stay the night, and you took advantage of that hospitality by being deceitful. And I don't remember all of the specific wording. It's one of those things where I read it a lot and kind of ruminated on it, but I also tried to block it out because, I mean, how do you call a 13-year-old a whore and a seductress? A seductress and a whore was what he said. So not only was I whoring around, but I was the reason that he fell astray. So it was not only, yeah. So, I mean, that was placed on my shoulders at 13, where I felt like I'm by no means trying to downplay what you went through, because you went through hell just like I did. So the way I say it might not come off right, but like, you were responsible for bringing down the ministry, but we were both responsible for that, in a way.
Apparently it sounds like you were responsible.
But I was responsible
for
you being led astray.
Yeah, you were the Eve to my Adam. It's her fault. That kind of thing.
She was the stumbling block.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, he called me that. And then he talked, like I quoted you use the Lord's house as a playground for wickedness.
Can we just acknowledge the audacity of a grown-ass man writing a 13-year-old a letter like that? And did he send that with your parents?
He gave it to my parents. I haven't asked. I was going to ask my stepdad if he had actually read it before he gave it to me. I don't know if they did or didn't. But I don't feel like even if they had read it, that it would have changed the fact that, like, I would have still received that letter. And
Dad
placed
himself at this level.
Based on how everything had gone so far, like, if it was me versus a Lasiter, their word was taken over mine. Like, if I talked to my parents about something, they would take their side, kind of thing. So it's like, even if they had read the letter, I'm sure they would have in some way agreed with what Larry had to say, because I did do those things. I don't know if they would have agreed with the harshness. I honestly don't know, because I don't know if they ever actually read the letter.
But Dad was like God's servant. He had elevated himself to that position. So it goes back to a lot of what we said, probably, where, even if something, let's say your parents read it and they felt, the ping of that being harsh, it's still like, well, this is God's chosen one. I mean,
so it must be right.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, he was already a deacon.
Your
right?
dad at this point? I think so.
I think so, because, like, you had talked about how, Larry had talked about how he didn't know if he was going to be able to continue on preaching and everything. The same was said for my stepdad, because he was a deacon, and it's like he might lose his place in the church because of your actions. So it was like all of those things.
Just fabricated hysteria.
Yeah, and
and it's inconsequential now, but I remember like when Liz and I don't remember how this got brought up. I think I've talked to you about this actually briefly, but like when Liz and I were going to get married and we were engaged or whatever, it somehow got brought up, I think with Jen. She assumed up until then that like Chelsie and I had lost our virginity to each other.
She was surprised that you were going to be a virgin on your wedding night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she assumed, like, because of the gravity of how all of that was, that, like we were just like sleeping together at 13 and 15, just all over the church and everywhere. So I've wondered, like, did you ever get any insight into what, because, like there were some people that knew, because like I think I had to write them down and you had to tell them like what we did and where. Did other people just assume?
I don't think
that it was way bigger.
I know, because we both had to go up in front of the church. Like, that was part of it. We had to spend 40 days and 40 nights in solitude. And then we were expected. I don't understand how they thought it's that whole, you have a choice. Do you really have a choice thing? Because it was like, after the 40 days and 40 nights, you will go in front of the church and repent and get baptized, or else, or what? Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to live in my house and be a stranger to my family and just be ostracized while still living there the whole time? What other choice do I actually have? And it's not like I just went up and repented and so I could get baptized, so I could just, I really did have a desire to be pleasing to the Lord. I did. I agonized over that a lot in my teen years, because I always felt like I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't reading my Bible enough. I wasn't, on my knees for an hour at night praying. There were times that I was, because I was like, oh, I haven't been doing this right, so I'm going to try to make up for it. But like, even if I hadn't wanted to be, in the church, I didn't have another choice. Were they going to send me away somewhere? Same with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they had talked about that for a minute. And I remember, like, they were talking to me, and they're talking about maybe sending Mattie away.
Where?
Oh yeah, I remember that. I was just thinking
Yeah.
about that. Like,
no, they had actually talked, or they got
probably to me. Like,
no, I just
the one that's already cast out, like, she's
picture-
bad, send him with her.
the picture I had in my head was like it was going to be like a boys' home,
an all-boys school,
Are
or
you
a
for
military
real?
camp or something. That's
Now,
what I
don't
was
know
thinking.
how far those talks went, but that I remember hearing that, like, that was a possibility. Like, you're just going to be like kicked out of here, and I'm 15. Like,
So
what?
I'm like, oh, if they're willing to do that with Mattie, like, what are they going to do with me, kind of thing. So it's like, we had a choice, but we didn't really have a choice.
No.
So they, after the 40 days and 40 nights, they made us get up in front of the church, and they said that we didn't have to go into detail about everything that happened, but we did have to go before the church and acknowledge and confess our sins and repent in front of the church, and then get baptized later that day.
Didn't we have the hug line after?
Yes,
Yeah,
which
that
was
was
really
always great.
awkward.
You know about that?
No.
Okay, so and this wasn't just when it happened with us. This is anytime anybody ever had this kind of a thing where they had to then like go confess before the church. When they come down from the lectern to in front, in front of the stage area, like, then the whole church
Receives
lines
you
up
with love
to come give you a
Yeah.
hug, and
Like,
and then just
after
like
a wedding ceremony where the bride and groom stand and everybody, like,
kind of
hugs them.
like
It was
everybody one by one goes
Oh
to
my
embrace this
God.
person, so you had to stand there for that whole thing, which was, of course, tons of fun.
What is with the public humiliation?
It's effective.
I honestly don't know. I mean, if
And
you're
how often did that happen? Like, what did people have to do? Or was this
I don't
only-
remember a lot of people doing that in the time that I was there.
Like, I guess that one of the issues that I've always had with Worldwide Church of God, a living, global, united dad's church, is this heavy emphasis on sex and sexuality. And that, you'll hear, well, all sin is the same, but in the church, it never was.
No.
And so that I'm curious about that, because my experience has been, and I can say this from living for sure, people can be doing all kinds of things that, the church would deem as sinful. Like, you shouldn't have done that. But it was always, if someone is found out to be having premarital sex, or they're dating someone outside the church or something, like, we've got to step in. And I mean, I saw there was a grown man in living that got kicked out at least 3 times, maybe more, and was basically coerced into marriage probably before he was ready, because this person's like in his 40s or 50s or something. Found out, oh, you're having sex. Like, the minister actually asked him if they were having sex, and he said yes. And he's, well, you can't come back to church unless you stop having sex or you get married. So he just got married.
Yeah.
Like, this person had like 5 marriages or something. But that's the culture. That's what you're cultivating when you do that. And so I'm just curious if that was really the only quote unquote sin that Dad really took notice of, where you would have to go up and confess to everyone, or were there other things that happened that way?
The times I remember people having to do that, usually it was when you were a member and you left and then came back after a time.
Yeah.
Like, I remember Jess, when she was gone from the church for a while and then came back. Like,
Oh, they
that
made her
kind of-
get up?
You'll have to ask her. I
Okay.
think that's
Yeah.
true. But those type of things, like if you're like welcoming them back because they can't just like have been a member and then leave on quote unquote bad terms and then just slip back in. Like it has to be like a
So
There's got to be a show of repentance.
And a big acknowledgement
with Larry,
thing.
there was always, you have to show you're repentant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when all of that happened, when it first happened, and, you know, Matt is distraught and praying and fasting for days, I had talked to Jess about it because I was like, it's a lot of stuff that, like I said, I've tried to push down and just block out of my memory. So I don't have a lot of memories of that time. I do remember specific things, but I was like, I had to stay in my room for the full 40 days and 40 nights, right? And she's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you came down like later, you know, but at the beginning, I didn't really understand exactly how serious everything was because in my mind, like, it wasn't, I knew it was a big deal to them. And I knew that what we did upset a lot of people. And I didn't like that part of it because I'm a very empathetic person. I don't like, you know, knowing that I cause other people pain. But I was like, we didn't really do anything. It was like, I know we lied and things like that, but I just didn't understand how it was ministry breaking, you know? And I just remember I talked to Jess and I was like, so how did that go at the beginning? And part of her story was she was like, well, one time, and I remembered it after she told me, it was one of those things. I had come downstairs to like get something to eat and they were like, what are you doing? And it's like, I'm getting something to eat. I'm hungry. And they're like, well, Matthew's up in his room praying and fasting. He's on like day 3 of praying and fasting. Like, what are you doing? And I was Jess said she could see. And I looked at them and I'm just like, but I'm hungry. And they're like, you need to go back upstairs. So like, I knew that praying and fasting shows repentance, but I was just like, I don't know. I didn't feel like, I felt like no matter what I did, they were still going to feel like I didn't do enough. Right. So what's the point in trying, you know? Yeah. Because they had already, you know.
Did they buy your story? Did they buy your story that you never had sex?
I don't know if they really believed. I don't know if they did or not.
Yeah, I don't remember them ever saying otherwise.
I don't either. Yeah. I feel like they might have, or maybe they were just
because you
like,
both told the same story separately or something.
Maybe.
But
I mean, that was the story, so.
Right, I know.
But yeah, I don't know if they ever thought that anything more than that actually happened or not.
Yeah.
I just remember that, and then I would stay in my room, and I was also homeschooled at that point, so.
Super isolated?
Yeah, there was no church, no family time, no schooling at that point. I think I wasn't even doing school at that point. I don't think. I remember they gave me my Bible. They gave me some pamphlets that Larry had given from Crusade Church. I don't remember the names of them, but they gave me several. So I had that material, and they gave me a Walkman. They did do that so I could listen to Christian music. So that is a little bit better. I'll say that. I had a bit more comfy of a time. And I listened to 100.3 The Edge on it when people were asleep. We both listened to 100.3 The Edge. But yeah, I did have a slightly easier time, I feel like. But for me, like, that's still very isolating.
It's very harsh. I wouldn't call that easy at all, for sure.
No. And to have you were the one that led him astray, you know. After that part of the letter, I remember there was they talked about, so-and-so let you guys come out to his shop and make money, and you betrayed his trust and his hospitality. You betrayed mine and Treon's trust. You are no longer allowed to refer to us as Big Mama and Big Daddy.
What?
You are no longer allowed to hug us. Those things were said to me in that letter. He said I could not call them Big Mama and Big Daddy anymore. He said that I was not allowed to hug them. He said that Treon couldn't bear to have me hug her with the pain that I'd caused and things like that. Those things were said. So he did.
And then this is all his doing.
Yeah.
It's like so crazy.
Yeah, no.
When you think about it.
I mean, I'm a very huggy person if it's somebody that I care about. And we were a huggy church.
Oh, God.
I adored your mother. She was like a second mom to me. My mom had her issues and she wasn't always home. So there were times where my stepdad would work. I would help take care of my younger sister, and I didn't always have my mom to take care of me, but when my mom was away, Treon helped with that. She would send meals home for us sometimes. I mean, I could cook, but I'm young.
Yeah.
She would send meals over sometimes, and she tried to do her best to help us, but we'd stay the night and be there. And she loved Food Network and cooking shows, and that was something that I was very passionate about. And my mom loved to cook too, but Treon was always I want to make something new. I want to try this food from this culture, and I loved that. She honestly, I give her that. She was the one that really brought out the foodie in me. Mm-hmm. She taught me how to drink tea properly. But I was her little sous chef in the kitchen on Saturdays when we were preparing for lunch and stuff. I'd go in there and I'd help her. So I loved your mom, and I still do. So it was very hard. It was harder for me to know that I caused her pain than Larry somehow. That killed me.
But
not being able to give her hugs and affection. And I had this thing where your mom did so much for everyone. She was always serving. And I saw that even at a young age. And so there was one thing that I did on Saturdays, when we're doing potluck and stuff and we're getting ready and we're cleaning up, I would always make it a point to go rub her back. And that was something we'd do for 5 minutes. I'd give her a good rub down, and it was just something I felt she needed. And in that letter, he was just basically I was after that, and after the baptism and everything, going back to church and trying to have a normal experience wasn't possible for me for a long time, because as much as I had gone up there and repented and got baptized, I could feel people's eyes on me.
Of course.
And so I always felt awkward. I didn't know how to behave, So it took a long time to really know how to interact with certain people, because I would go to give them a hug, and they would give me a hug, maybe a little side hug. It wasn't the usual hugs. You weren't getting treated, even though we'd both gone up. I feel you probably went through some of that too. I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking back specifically. Obviously, with Dad, it was that way.
You just didn't know how to gauge. Are we good now?
Well, the side
Are we not?
hug thing.
Yeah.
You repented, and even you're baptized, and you're back at church, but
you weren't fully back.
No, it was not
you
over
weren't,
yet.
It wasn't all forgiven. It was, you're going to have to prove yourself now.
Yes, absolutely.
This is part of his legacy, severing connection when he can't control a situation. That is his way of control, is severing connection, which is just really a very, very cruel thing to do to people. this would be a time where I feel like you would have benefited from guidance.
Yeah.
Like, you're young and you like someone, and compassion and love and understanding is what you actually needed and could have gone so far, Instead, there's shame just heaped on you guys. And then, you don't get any love, affection, or connection with us because you did something that I don't like.
It's when you need those things the most, they're withheld and weaponized. Like that's the legacy there, just generally speaking, which is just, man, it's hard to find the term for that.
And I think when you grow up with that, it really messes with your connections with other people. You have to finally come to the realization that not everyone thinks like that, that there are people that you can be in relationship with and you don't have to worry about severed connection if you disagree about something.
Yeah.
But when you grow up with that, I think you guard yourself a little bit more because you don't know if this is going to be taken away from you at any point. I know I dealt with that and really didn't let very many people in. And that was part of the reason. It's I didn't trust anyone.
No, I still struggle with that. I mean, I've gone through several relationships and that's a hard thing. Giving and receiving love sometimes is very difficult. Compliments, can't do it.
Yeah.
It's hard. But I don't know. I know I never really thought that those events had as much of an impact on me until I really started processing that with my therapist and just really realizing just how much those events have shaped me as a person. I'm not going to be I'm the victim, I blame everything on that, not by any means, but it's just surprising to see how certain things did cause me to have certain defense mechanisms and just not feeling comfortable with love sometimes because it's why do I want this when it's just going to get taken away from me again?
Yeah.
I don't want this because it's going to get too good and then I'm not going to have it anymore. So I should just keep my distance. That way I don't get hurt again. And so I feel like that's played a pretty large role in a lot of my relationships. And growing up having zero control over anything that happens to you. Now being an adult, it's if I don't have control over a certain thing, or if I think one thing's going to be one way and it turns out to be the complete opposite, I have moments where I'm just I can't handle this.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming. And so it's I didn't realize that my need for having certain things a certain way is that's just from not having control for so long.
Absolutely. It goes so much deeper, I think, than we realize.
I'm just scratching the surface. I'm a little afraid to find out what's underneath, but at the same time, that's the only way that things are going to get better.
Yeah,
so
100%.
If you like this episode of The Cult Next Door, please leave us a positive review and rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified of new episodes.